See, Paul gave me this. Let's see if I can figure out how to. Paul, maybe not. Okay. Okay. For, I think everybody that's with us today, they've got my contact info.
Did you think it was working?
No. Oh, that is. Oh, perfect. All right. Thank you, Paul.
I think I had gun low, so you had to push harder.
That's all it was. Yes. Well, you got the magic fingers. All right. So buyer representation agreement. This I put here just for Christy. This is a nice little quote from Jared James. Attorneys get their hands on something and want to change everything. But essentially what Jared James is saying when he's talking, well, he doesn't practice real estate anymore, but he's encouraging people to use the term, it's just a change in accounting. Because essentially not a lot has changed, but the way that we explain it to our clients and the way that it's presented in a closing statement, you know, that's the same. But it is a change in accounting as far as making sure that people are well aware of who is responsible for what. So why do we use this agreement? Well, we go ahead and set our expectations up front and let buyers know why this is now a requirement. So it ensures the transparency. It essentially was put into place by the Department of Justice as a consumer protection. It clearly defines the buyer and agent duties owed to each other. It discusses the compensation, and Edmund recommends calling it a professional fee. Tyann sent that over. I thought that was great, rather than using the term commission, which sometimes is frowned upon, using the term professional fee or something of that nature. It also defines the scope and the term of your agreement. You can use quotes like, I work exclusively with serious buyers. This agreement ensures that I'm committed to you. That way you can make sure that your clients know the reason why we're doing this is the commitment. It binds us together. With this agreement, I work as your advocate and I put your best interests first. So anytime you have a buyer that questions, why are we doing this now? I bought a house 3 years ago and I didn't have to do this. Go ahead and let them know that this is something put into place by the Department of Justice and this is what binds us together and these are my duties to you. We'll kind of go through those together. So when do we use this? And this is actually a question I've gotten quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. So you want to use it before you're showing a buyer a residential property, anything that's 4 units or less. If you're doing any virtual tours of a residential property for a buyer, you also need to have this buyer rep agreement signed, or filming a walkthrough of a property that you'll be sending to a buyer later. You'll want to make sure that buyer rep agreement is signed. When do we not need to use it? Well, if you are the listing agent, if you're hosting an open house on your own listing, you can invite buyers to come in, or if you're hosting an open house on behalf of a listing agent in your office. Also, you do not have to use this for commercial properties. You don't have to use this for anything that's larger than 4 units as far as residential goes. You don't need to use it, I believe, with land listings.
For land. We don't have to
Okay, perfect. So what I wanted to recommend, I know in the past few years, we kind of jump at every call we get. We go and show every house as soon as it comes up on the market, which yes, as we're heading into the spring market, you do want to make sure that you are getting in quickly. But I recommend getting into the habit of having a buyer consultation with every buyer. Set your expectation up front, get all of the paperwork signed all at once. It doesn't have to be very long. My buyer consultations are generally less than 30 minutes. Takes no time at all, but you can go over everything. You can gauge the seriousness of that buyer and you can go from there. So the buyer rep agreement, we are all very familiar with this top portion here. It's very similar to what we see in our purchase and sale contracts now. So there is a slight change, and you may have seen this email go out last week, the KREC license numbers that we need to be using. Lexington, Hamburg, and Nicholasville will be using 276019. Richmond will be using Cassie's, and Danville, I know that you're used to using Tammy's already, but I've got that there. So of course, this is all of the contact information. This way you know what all parties are involved and how to get in touch with them, and your clients know how to get in touch with the brokerage as well if need be.
Who's that 2761?
Yeah, that's mine. Yes. So the scope of this, we're all very familiar. Christy's done such a great job at explaining all of this, but we'll just kind of go over it really quick. Just the scope here, you want to make sure that you are identifying where the buyer is looking to purchase. It talks about the price range, it talks about the types of homes, or even specific property addresses. So of course you can keep this as non-specific as you want, and it covers every home in the state of Kentucky. But best practice for your hesitant buyers, because I know that there are a lot of them out there, and I hope Dustin's on this call, maybe he will know. Go ahead and specify the address of the property, the one that they have asked to see. And then make sure that in the term, that you are using a term that will protect you, that protects your time as far as this goes. Yes, there was an agent in the office that had this term set for exactly 1 day. By the next day, this was expired and that buyer was able to go to another agent and sign a new buyer rep agreement and make an offer on a property that one of our agents showed them. And luckily, all that cost was his time, but it's of course a mistake that I'm sure won't be made again. So yes, specify a time frame that you and the buyer are comfortable with. Generally, what I see when I'm signing paperwork for the office are 3, 6, 9, and 12-month terms. I've seen them all. And if you have a hesitant buyer, I mean, make it maybe a month if you and your buyer are okay with that. So, one thing we do have to keep in mind, these lines here, lines 31 through 33 supersede anything else that you read in this agreement. So you've got your term, you've got your protection period here. If you haven't filled it out, it is automatically 180 days. However, if after expiration or termination of this agreement and buyer is not otherwise in breach of this contract, buyer enters into another exclusive buyer representation agreement with another broker, then the buyer shall not be required to pay the buyer broker commission of this contract, stating that that buyer is free after termination, so you've gotten written notice and 3 days have passed, or the expiration, that buyer is free to go sign another buyer representation agreement with another broker to make an offer. So that's why that the timeframes that you use are very important. And of course, try to make your buyer happy and make sure that they don't terminate the contract. Now, one thing that you can, that does benefit us here is that if that buyer is already under contract with you to purchase a home, if this were to expire, you are still protected as an agent. You do not have to get this re-signed with a longer term. So yes, down here, once your agreement expires, buyer can sign a new agreement with another agent. Christy said essentially that when this agreement expires, it's basically as if it was not there. Although there is a protection period built in, once it has been expired, it's as if this never existed, was the terminology that she used.
Okay, so that scope, within the scope days, that goes to 180 days, what does that protect?
So that protects you in the event that that buyer were to go say to the seller and say, hey, I want to make an offer on your house. That protects you at that point.
Okay.
But if they were to say, go to the listing agent, that listing agent were to then have them sign another buyer representation, then you are no longer due your commission. It's written to the contract. I know when I was reading through this, there are a lot of things that tend to kind of negate each other.
Yes.
But so that is why
Negative.
yes, it is. That's why I wanted to go ahead, lines 31 through 33. These are lines that we don't tend to think about, but they are very important when it comes to the whole scope of this contract. Buyer broker compensation. Of course, this is where you'll list your percentage, your flat fee, other fee, anything, any way that you might be doing business. You will be specifying this here on the first page. Now, the commission does have to be specific. It cannot say up to a certain amount. So you do have to make sure that you've got a specific number in there, that it can be accounted, accounting wise. And yes, this number can be adjusted down to reduce your commission and so that the buyer can benefit from that.
If we do reduce it down, does it have to be changed on the buyer rep agreement?
It does need to be changed on the buyer representation
lower
agreement
amount.
to the lower amount.
Okay, because I have not done that.
I have not either, Tyann, honestly, with
Okay.
you. As I was speaking with Christy about that yesterday, yes, she does recommend that we
Okay.
do go ahead and have this adjusted. That way, that buyer is not accountable
Okay,
for any extra.
that makes
Yes.
sense. I've done that like in multiple offer situations and
Mhm.
I'll reduce it by like 0.5%.
Yeah, we're seeing
Just
that a
to-
lot these
yeah,
days, and I
just
think
to-
it really does make a difference to the
Mhm.
seller.
Mhm.
Yes.
It's nothing.
Yeah, you helped me with a transaction once, and that was the determining
yeah.
factor between the offers was one of the agents, and that one closed yesterday, so thank you, Diane.
That's what I've done.
Yes, yes, we do what we have to, right, for our
In a
clients.
competitive environment.
Yes, and it's become very competitive just in the past couple of weeks.
Yes, it has.
Yeah. All right, any other questions about the compensation portion? So, buyer broker compensation, and I typically try to explain this as best and as clear as I can to my clients. I let them know how this gets paid. Now, of course, when the buyer signs this agreement, they are saying that they are willing to pay this. But of course, we know in reality, a lot of times sellers are still paying this compensation. It just has to be negotiated in the contract. So what I typically do is I've got this in my buyer guide that I give to all of my clients when I'm meeting with them during their consultation. It gives them different options, and I'm happy to share it with anyone that might want it. Option one is that the seller does agree to pay the compensation negotiated into the contract. Option two, the seller agrees to pay some of the compensation, but not all. And in that event, the buyer has the option to try to renegotiate that contract to include all of your compensation that they owe you. But you can also, at this time, go ahead and reduce your commission and have the buyer representation agreement re-signed. Or it could be that the seller's not offering any commission to the buyer's agent, and that happens sometimes. I've had a client that was very against it, especially when the rules first came into play. They were not willing to offer any type of compensation, and then in that event, of course, you can attempt to renegotiate. The buyer can try to increase their purchase price. You know, sometimes that will get dinged in the appraisal, but they can say, okay, let me increase the purchase price by this amount that I've agreed to pay my buyer's agent. And in turn, the seller might agree to pay that commission at that point. They of course can just pay you directly at closing, or they can move on and try to find a different property.
I know I was gonna ask you, has that impacted, one of our agents, it impacted her showings?
When
Did you
there
notice
was
that?
nothing offered up
Yeah.
front, I have actually noticed that agents are not
They're not
calling me
calling.
anymore.
I know,
They're
that's
not
the way-
asking up front,
Yeah,
which I can understand because the way that the exclusive right to sell is now written, there is no offering. I know that
Exactly.
there are some brokerages that are going ahead and
Yeah.
including a buyer's agent commission in there. In our market, I think there's 3 specifically that I've seen. And in that case, they will relay that information to you. But I, as a listing agent, I'm not experiencing buyer's agents calling me. And as a buyer's agent,
I
I'm
know
not
that.
calling listing agents. That's just not something that I
I know.
bring up anymore. I just expect for it to be brought up in the purchase.
So
and sale
then
contract.
if it's written in there and your sellers has said, no, I'm not gonna pay it. I had one that, yeah, we negotiated hard, like we replied back, okay, we're only pay 1%.
Mhm.
And, you know, then a second offer came in, anyway, it got negotiated up, and my clients ended up paying 3% once it went above like. list
Oh,
price.
yeah, once it got to that point.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
at first they were really adamant about not
Yes,
paying it.
yes. And I, bless her heart, love this client dearly.
Yeah,
We ended up withdrawing that property because she received 3 offers, was not willing to negotiate any of them. She would not respond if it had a buyer's agent commission on it. So we did withdraw that property. Now, with that being said, sat down and had a meeting with her, kind of discussed all of the things of, you know, you have to keep in mind the comps that we used. There's a chance that those were likely giving some sort of compensation to the buyer's agent. So you have to take that in consideration in the sale price. Now, we have since relisted and it is under contract, and she is offering a buyer's agent commission. Yes. You know, that was just a conversation. She said it was like a coming to God conversation when I sat down with her. She's like, what do you think went wrong? So we did. We discussed the things that went wrong, and this was a big portion of it. You know, a lot of times buyers are already spending a lot of cash. They want to put as much down on the house as they can. They got closing costs involved as well. So this, having a seller that's, you know, even I have this for my sellers as well, just so that they know what to expect. But making sure that these consumers are well aware of how this works and what to expect to see, and setting that expectation up front, I think really does make a big difference. Yeah. So this fee, this commission that this buyer has agreed to pay you is due when buyer closes on a property, buyer is under contract and breaches that contract. You are technically owed that commission. The buyer closes on a property fitting the scope, unless, back to lines 31 and 33, unless they have signed a buyer representation agreement with another brokerage, or buyer breaches this agreement. They have gone ahead, because there's a line item in the buyer representation agreement that states that they will not go into contract using a buyer representation agreement with another agent. So if you do get wind of it, then technically the buyer owes you something at that point as well.
If it's still in the term.
If it's still within that term.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Now, with all of that being said, you know, there's been a lot of, well, procuring cause conversations and whatnot. We are no longer going to be seeing that, mainly because there is not a commission that's being offered up front. The commission now is being written into a contract, so there's no offering of anything to go after. So at this point now, if an agent does want to go after a buyer, they are going after the consumer, whereas previously you would have been going after the other agent.
Yes.
So we have to keep that in mind, even though if we are due under some of these extenuating circumstances. We do have to keep in mind that it's the consumer that we're dealing with, and we have to make our decisions at that point. So it outlines our duties as broker and agent, so we will comply with the Kentucky law. So I don't know if we have a copy of this in the office, but I do, I have an old copy from 2020 and there's not been a lot of changes. So I'll leave this one here in case anybody wants to take a look. But there's a new one that was released in 2023. But it does outline all of the duties that we owe to our buyers. It talks about fiduciary duties and old car, you know, all of those things that we learn in real estate school. So we'll comply with all of the laws as far as we are able to do. Assist the buyer in finding property. We will contract for them and negotiate for them. We'll hold the escrow in good faith and perform the duties set forth in this agreement. And that's the link if you wanted to purchase this. This is from KREC. Buyer duties. The buyer is also agreeing to things here. They agree to cooperate with the agent and pay the compensation that they have discussed here on page 1. They say that they will communicate through you as the buyer's agent. They will timely comply with any requests relating to the contract and the close. This one's my favorite. They will show up to appointments. Yeah,
That's a good one.
that's a good one. Yes. So is that stated? It is.
Are they on
It
time?
is.
Are they on time?
Yes, right. Is there a stipulation there? Like, do you give them 15-minute window or something like that? Yes. That they will timely investigate during the due diligence period, that they will seek independent advice on topics agents are not experts in. They will say, go to their contractors. They will go to their accountants, you know, that kind of thing. Things that that is not in our scope. They will read all the documents the buyer is requested to sign and consult attorney with questions.
Read all.
That puts the responsibility on the buyer. They will timely take care of their due diligence period and they will read all of their documents. They will work exclusively with one buyer broker as well. So what else is included? So of course, the buyer representation agreement is not the only document that you have to have signed. So this document here states that you are also providing the buyer with a guide to agency relationships, which we all know is required at the very first significant contact with the buyer. The agency consent agreement also needs to be signed. And I always put a little initial box in the fair housing brochure because you're required to share this one too. Might as well get their stamp on it. So everyone knows it's very clear that they've received that as well. And the acknowledgement. So this one's fun. This one's on, I believe, page 3. Disclosures and acknowledgements, section 5. So these are all the things that we just want to go ahead and put out there that the buyer understands. You could be representing 2 buyers that are interested in the same property. That the buyer's agent is not responsible to supervise new construction. You are not an expert in new construction. It is not your responsibility. Now, you of course can go out there and take pictures. If you've got a client that lives out of state, you want to update them, that's entirely up to you. You are not technically responsible for that. The buyer is responsible for complying with deadlines. So I highly recommend using the contract timeline that's in your loops. Go ahead, as soon as a property is under contract, fill this out. I like to send a screenshot via text message to my clients so they can save it in their photos, refer back to it anytime they have a question about special deadlines. Yes, yes. Because it is their responsibility. Now, of course, a good agent will always make sure to remind your clients, hey, tomorrow is the last day of your due diligence period, whatnot, but it is their responsibility to keep up with that. It says that you will not withhold any knowledge regarding a property that the buyer might be interested in. If you happen to know information on it, that you will share it. Now, of course, if you are the listing agent as well, there are fiduciary duties there, so make sure you're keeping that line. Sorry. Make sure that you are not crossing any lines there. Buyers to seek professional expert advice regarding the law and the home-related specifics that the agents are not experts in. So it just repeats that one more time. Agent vendor recommendations are not warranted. I always recommend at least sending 3. If someone's looking for an inspector, if they're looking for even a surveyor or a contractor, I typically try to recommend as many as I can. That way, if that buyer is not happy with the one contractor or one professional that you recommended, they can't come back and say, well, they told me I had to use them. So make sure you give options. That agents make no guarantee of statements or facts disclosed. We are there to relay information that we received from someone else. So we cannot be held reliable for something that someone else may have misspoke on. Buyers are responsible for researching safety and crime, and there are some resources here for them. I was told at one point in a class of Bluegrass Realtors that you should never recommend which websites for your clients to look at. Now, with that being said, this is built in. So you've got the Kentucky State Police crime map linked here. You've also got the sex offender registry list linked here as well. But also keep this in mind when it comes to like schools. I had a teacher once that had given me a website that she uses, greatschools.org, and that's where she was researching different areas in Lexington. So at first, when people were asking me, I would send them to that website. Now, with that being said, I don't know the criteria that website uses. I don't know if my buyers have the same, what's important to them. I don't know if that's the same things as what's important to me. So I no longer share that, but I do let them know. I let my clients know. You can research the schools online. You've got a lot of great information, but you want to make sure your buyer is searching for that information themselves. Also, it includes a wire fraud warning. I don't know about you all, but just about every other message I get right now that is a lead tends to be something that's a scam. A lot of times it's asking me to download WhatsApp. I don't have WhatsApp. I tell people, I respond, my business policy is not to deal with WhatsApp because of scams. And then immediately it's dead silence.
Yeah.
So you know it's not real. Yes. And I recommend all of you, if you've got an email signature, go ahead and put a wire fraud warning at the bottom of your email signature. Go ahead and let any consumer know that you are emailing, that you're communicating with. Hey, there's some things going on out there. So just have a little fine print at the bottom. And termination. So of course, nobody ever wants to terminate this contract after you've been working hard for a buyer, but at the same time, not all relationships work out. That's just how it is. So if you feel that you no longer wish to work with the buyer, or the buyer feels like you are not working in their best interest, they can terminate this agreement with 3 days written notice. They do have to wait that 3 days before they move on with another buyer agent agreement. That if they do enter into a contract with another agent during that time, well, if they were to do that, then they would be in breach and therefore would owe you some sort of commission. But if the buyer broker commission is still owed if the buyer enters a contract during the protection period, and if you are, of course, that agent, so like I said earlier, this doesn't expire. You don't have to redo this during that time. You are still protected, your commission is still protected. If there is a claim, controversy, or dispute, just like our purchase and sale agreement state, that both parties agree to mediation first. And it's funny the way they write it here, because they talk about litigation first and then mediation. But then the mediation clause does state that both parties agree to mediation first, that they will split the cost of that mediation. And if litigation is required and mediation doesn't work out, if we have to move on to litigation, the prevailing party is entitled to recover the costs of going to court. And then, of course, the acceptance box. We want to make sure that brokers are signing this. I know at first when this agreement came out, it was a question of, okay, can agents sign here instead? But with the most updated version, they do require that a broker signature is on this document. And of course, I noted here just the email change for Cassie and Richmond. Tammy Carr, I know her agents are used to using this one already, but that broker at Remax Elite KY, we want to make sure we're sending documents to that for Tyann and I to look over.
When is the best place to send that to her? To sign?
When?
When?
You know, I have seen it before agents go in to meet with their buyers. They'll go ahead and get this together. They'll sign it, I'll sign it, and then they'll go meet with their buyers.
Okay.
But also you can wait until after your buyers have already signed it as well and send it over at that point.
Either way.
Yeah, either way. And yeah, so that's the end of my presentation on the buyer representation agreement.
Okay.